Hello and welcome back to Finding the Alternative. Today we're going to dive into the long-awaited subject of the Passover. This is going to be a three-part series due to the mountains of information to discuss. I have researched this subject probably for close to 50 hours to get my findings, and I will do my best to simplify everything and not to bore you with all the details. But please stick with me as I believe it will be worth it in the end. Specifically speaking, we are talking about the WMSCOG version of Passover, which is called the New Covenant Passover. But if you are new here and have not seen the intro to the channel yet, please go watch the video first, as it will answer many questions that you may have. It's kind of like our channel's mission statement. Anyways, we have a lot to get into, so let's go. We're going to break the normal format of the channel today. The reason being is because there is simply too much information to go over. That being said, today we're going to cover what is the teaching in regards to the New Covenant Passover, its regulations, and its importance according to the WMSCOG. Also, we will tackle the historical controversy surrounding it, and what does the Bible say about the New Covenant Passover? So let's dive into it. What is the teaching of the WMSCOG in regards to the New Covenant Passover? Honestly, just like the Book of Life, it is a very powerful fear tactic. Let me explain in a kind of story format. Let's say you are studying at a local community college as a student. You go to the library for some quiet study time and open your books and begin to dive into your study material with your headphones in. After about 10 minutes or so, you feel a slight tap on your shoulder. You look up expecting a professor or some sort of campus staff or your friends, but it's two people you haven't seen before. You can't tell if they are students or not because something about them just seems out of place and you've never seen them in any classes. After taking out your headphones, you ask them, "What's up?" They begin to talk about a club on campus called Elohim Bible Study Club and ask if you are part of any clubs right now. You say no because you're too busy focusing on your studies, the very thing you're paying money to be there for. The duo then says that the club they have on campus is non-denominational and it's a Bible study club, and they only teach from the Bible. You think that sounds good and let your guard down a little bit. Then they begin to ask you personal questions about what you're studying or where you're from. Are you from around here? How old are you? Are you Christian? And many other things. You're kind of put off by this at first. After all, you are just trying to study and they're interrupting you. But your mom raised you to be polite, and so you indulge and answer their prodding questions that they have no business knowing. Then they ask if you are religious or go to church. You remember the time your grandma took you to church at Easter Mass a few times. After doing some internal auditing, you come to the conclusion that you are a Christian, or at least you think you are. After proudly relaying the information that you are indeed a Christian, the personal questions from the intruding duo begin again. What church do you go to? Do you know the Bible? Do you believe the Bible? How well do you know the Bible if you know the Bible? You start to slightly panic because you don't know what to say, because you haven't thought about these questions hardly ever in your life, thus beginning another internal audit, which after a few milliseconds of thought, you say, "I know the Bible a little bit, I guess," hoping that that will suffice and put an end to the prodding questions. Immediately upon saying that you know the Bible a little bit, you notice how there is a slight shift in the intruding duo's demeanor. They seem a little different now. Did you say something wrong? No, my friend, you have said everything right. The duo then proceeds to say that they are studying about the Passover. To your horror, they ask another question. Have you ever heard of the Passover that can protect you from disasters? You are thinking to yourself, oh great, now they're asking me specific questions of what the Bible contains now. Then your third and probably final internal audit happens. After a few seconds of reflection, you come to the conclusion that you have no idea what they are talking about. So you say, "No, I haven't." After saying that, you notice yet another shift in the demeanor of this duo. They are getting closer to you and in a way more relaxed. They ask you if they can sit down next to you, insisting it will only take a moment and it is very important. Remembering your mother raised you to be tolerant of people's beliefs and show respect to all, you then tell them, "That's fine." They sit down right next to you at the table and begin to open the Bible and show you Exodus chapter 12 verses 5 to 14. They begin to explain how God protected the Israelites in the Old Testament only after they kept the Passover. Since God commanded it, it's probably important, right? They ask. Also, the Bible says it's a lasting ordinance for generations to come. That means even us as Christians should keep it too, right? I guess so, you think to yourself. Then they turn the Bible to Matthew chapter 26, verses 17 to 19. They explain, here we see Jesus instructed his disciples to go and make preparations for them to eat the Passover. So Jesus, who is God, is telling his disciples how to prepare the Passover. Then what is the Passover exactly? They ask. Pointing to verse 26 to 28, they say, here we see Jesus said the bread and wine is the Passover. Now obviously this isn't the old covenant Passover that's being kept, but it is the new covenant that Jesus instituted before his death. Also, the bread and wine is known as Jesus' flesh and blood. They turn now to John chapter 6 verses 53 and 54. They say, here we can clearly see that Jesus said his flesh and blood is eternal life. Then those who don't keep the new covenant Passover will never have life according to the words of Jesus. But what must we do first in order to keep the Passover? They ask. We must be baptized and have our feet washed. John chapter 13 verses 4 to 10. They explain, here we see Jesus said, unless I wash your feet, you have no part with me. Then if you want to have part with God, it means you must wash your feet. We can't keep the Passover without the feet washing. Also, Jesus said that those who have a bath need only to wash their feet, meaning those who have been baptized must only wash their feet. You're thinking to yourself, okay, so good so far, what next? Then they go on to explain, then we as Christians who want eternal life should keep the Passover of the new covenant, right? It means we should get baptized and keep the Passover with the feet washing beforehand. Then why does God want you to have eternal life? Is it to live on earth? No, of course not. It is to live together forever with God in heaven, right? Then they show Revelation chapter 21 verse 4. They go on to explain that in order for us to live in heaven forever, we must have Jesus' flesh and blood. The flesh and blood is only given through the Passover. Then have you kept the Passover? They ask. Now the conversation finally turns back to you after about an hour or so of them going on and on about the bread and wine. You think to yourself, well, I went to Easter a few times with my grandma, so you confidently say, yes, I did have the bread and wine at Easter with my grandma, so yeah, I'm good. The duo gives each other another look, and then proceeds to turn to Leviticus chapter 23 to explain that unless you do the Passover on the specific date of the first month 14th day in the evening or twilight, that the bread and wine you ate with your grandma is actually meaningless. The duo then proceeds to explain that it only becomes Jesus' flesh and blood on the specific date and at that specific time. You are still confused as to why the time and date are necessary since you're not Jewish, because you never thought that a Christian was supposed to be Jewish. Then the duo proceeds to show you another reason why the church you went to is completely wrong by insisting that the Passover is also the seal of God that was restored by the second coming of Christ. But they say that's another study for another time. At this point, you have no idea what that means, but you're super interested in that topic, and that is something you have never heard of before. The duo says, next time for sure, but what is more important is to receive the Passover as the Bible prophesies about the Third World War that is coming, and it could be any day. You now think to yourself, well, that got dark and scary really fast. They proceed to show you Revelation chapter 7, verses 1 to 4. They explain here in these verses, see, wind represents war. Where is the wind coming from? All corners of the world, meaning World War. But this is the final war that destroys everything. This is the Third World War. Then in order for you to be protected from this world war, you must keep the seal of God, the Passover. Then again, the duo asks, have you kept the Passover? You reply, well, I guess not, considering what you've told me thus far. Immediately after saying that, you can tell that the duo seems satisfied with that answer. Because up to this point, every answer you gave was met with pushback until this one. Now you're a bit worried as it seems like there's an impending doom coming right towards you. I mean, World War III sounds horrendously awful. And now you know, according to these strangers, you're not protected since you haven't kept their version of Passover. It appears that this duo came at the perfect time to make sure you correct your theology around the bread and wine and make sure you are protected with the Passover. God works in mysterious ways, you think to yourself. Then the duo then proceeds to tell you that the Passover was actually abolished in 325 AD, and that there was no truth of salvation on earth for a long time, but that it was restored by somebody. You ask for more details, and they say next time we'll study about it. The duo asks you when you're free next, and if they can have your number. You usually don't give out your number, but hey, it's better than dying in World War III, you think? So you give them your number, and they make an appointment with you next week at the campus. Strangely enough, you never hear about the so-called Bible study club on campus, which was the original conversation starter for a long, long time. The end. Now, I'm sure you as leaders or members or even ex-members can probably guess what happens next, right? But essentially, this is the type of scenario many college campus students face all the time from the WMSCOG. They are all about going in disguise on campus and sharing their truth about their Passover and scaring people into following them. They will deny it, but that's okay. Anyways, this is the basic teaching of the Passover, and it shows you how the WMSCOG uses it to scaremonger people into their Bible studies and eventually joining their church. The reason I know this is because a lot of time I was the one doing the very thing I just described. So if there's a WMSCOG member or leader watching, don't worry. It's myself that I am throwing under the bus on this one. Now, I know the WMSCOG leader or member watching it will probably say, well, we don't do that. That's just what you did. And it doesn't reflect the WMSCOG at all. To that, I say, okay. I think it's important to note here that the WMSCOG is not the first church to keep the Passover bread and wine or fearmonger people into keeping it. For instance, the Worldwide Church of God, formerly Radio Church of God, founded in 1934 by Herbert Armstrong, kept the Passover on the first month 14th day in the evening with the feet washing ceremony, just like the WMSCOG. Herbert Armstrong, the founder of the Worldwide Church of God, restored the Passover ceremony before Armstrong did. Now I know the WMSCOG is going to say, well, Armstrong followed the sunset reckoning, so it's not valid. Well, Passover happens at night, so regardless of if you follow sunrise or sunset reckoning, you're going to keep Passover at night, so it doesn't matter and it's not a good counter. The WMSCOG will then probably say, well, the Bible says that the Passover must come from the east and not the west. Okay, what Bible verse or passage says that, or even hints at that? Now I know you're probably thinking of the seal of God or God's coming from the east subjects. Fair point, I'll make some videos about that later. But still, show me in the verse where the Bible says that the Passover is going to be destroyed. Not only that, but that it's going to be destroyed and then restored again. And not only that, but show me where in the Bible that it says the Passover is going to be destroyed and then restored in the east, but not the west. I would love to see those passages of Scripture and those prophecies. Even if the Passover is supposed to come from the east, and it is indeed Armstrong who restores it, and that the restoration was a secret sign of some second coming of Christ, then why would God allow an American in the West to restore it first, if it is not part of the plan? Sounds like God's trying to make things harder for absolutely no reason. If Armstrong is God, and he was the only one that knew the hidden secrets of salvation, aka Passover, why would he allow an American in the West to restore Passover first? Unless, maybe of course, WMSCOG's understanding of God's plan and salvation is wrong. I know some WMSCOG members and leaders will now say, well, even if Armstrong did restore the ceremony of the Passover, it is meaningless because he doesn't believe in the true God. Well, how do you know he doesn't believe in the true God? How do you know that you believe in the true God? Isn't it through the Passover you come to know true God and all the other false gods are destroyed? Then that would mean that by the WMSCOG standards, Armstrong knows who true God is as all the other gods are destroyed. So it means Armstrong does know the true God since he kept the Passover, right? Or is the Passover not the way to recognize true God and not the way to destroy false gods? You can't have both. Also, restoring the act of believing in God is not the premise of the WMSCOG's restoration, is it? No one ever abolished the belief in God. The point of the restoration is to restore the Passover and the way you can know true God through the Passover, correct? I was never told that the restoration was to restore the belief in God itself, and that the belief in God is the sign of Christ. If that were the case, then every church that has ever opened has been the restoration or the true church. So that insistence is nothing more than a cop-out. You can't proclaim the Passover is the only way to know true God and destroy false gods. But then when you find out Armstrong restored the Passover first, then you turn around and claim Armstrong doesn't know true God. Is the Passover the way to know true God or not? If Passover is indeed the way you recognize true God and destroy false gods, then you must accept that Armstrong restored it first and that Armstrong knows the true God, which makes the WMSCOG restoration claim nonsense, unless you admit that the Passover does not actually lead you to true God and doesn't destroy false gods. And if that's the case, then why bother keeping it? Anyways, I think that's enough on this point. Let's continue with the scriptures. Now it is time for us to look into the Bible and take a look at these arguments and see if what the WMSCOG teaches is true. If it is true, then it does require obedience. If it's not true, it will still require obedience, but just to the Bible instead of to the WMSCOG doctrine. Let's see Exodus chapter 12, verses 1 to 14. the Lord said to Moses and Aaron in Egypt, "This month is to be for you the first month of your year. Tell the whole community of Israel that on the 10th day of this month each man is to take a lamb for his family, one for each household. If any household is too small for a whole lamb, they must share one with their nearest neighbor, having taken into account the number of people there are. You are to determine the amount of lamb needed in accordance with what each person will eat. The animals you choose must be year-old males without defect, and you may take them from the sheep or the goats. Take care of them until the 14th day of the month, when all the members of the community of Israel must slaughter them at twilight. Then they are to take some of the blood and put it on the sides and tops of the doorframes of the houses where they eat the lambs. That same night they are to eat the meat roasted over the fire, along with bitter herbs, and bread made without yeast. Do not eat the meat raw or boiled in water, but roast it over a fire, with the head, legs, and internal organs. Do not leave any of it till morning. If some is left till morning, you must burn it. This is how you are to eat it, with your cloak tucked in your belt, and your sandals on your feet, and your staff in your hand. Eat it in haste. It is the Lord's Passover. On that same night I will pass through Egypt and strike down every firstborn of both people and animals. I will bring judgment on all the gods of Egypt. I am the Lord. The blood will be a sign for you on the houses where you are, and when I see the blood, I will pass over you. No destructive plague will touch you when I strike Egypt. This is a day you are to commemorate. For the generations to come you shall celebrate it as a festival to the Lord, a lasting ordinance." So here we can clearly see the regulation of the Passover. They are to take a young lamb, without blemish or defect, must be a year old, and they are to separate them from the other sheep from the first month 10th day into the first month 14th day. Then at that time they are to slaughter them at twilight. Here, this twilight in Hebrew is written as areb. The meaning of areb is to decline. Then what does areb imply? It means between the evenings. Then what does in between the evenings mean? Well, on a Hebrew day, there are two evenings. There's an evening during the day and an evening of the night. Let me explain. The day begins at sunrise, or around 6 a.m., or hour zero. The evening of the day is at the 6th hour, or high noon. Why? Because the 6th hour is the time when the sun is at the highest point in the sky. After the 6th hour, the sun begins to decline. Then when the sun starts to set, usually around the 12th hour, it is finally evening. So to put it simply, the first evening is the 6th hour, or high noon, and the second evening is the 12th hour. Then what is in between the two evenings? Well, it's the 9th hour. This means that the Passover lambs were slaughtered between the evenings, or the 9th hour. Now, I know what you're thinking. Why not just say 12 p.m., 3 p.m., and 6 p.m.? Well, I hesitate to do that because the ancient Jews calculated time based on the position of the sun. It is totally different from our timekeeping today. Today we have a strict 60-minute block of time, regardless of the year and the phases of the sun. That is not how it worked back then. Since the Jews kept track of their hours by the sun, it means that their hours were longer or shorter depending on the time of year. For instance, sometimes their hours were only about 45 minutes in the winter, and in the summer, their hours could be more than 75 minutes long, meaning their evening or sunset could be as early as 5 or 6 p.m. in the winter, and as late as 9 or 10 p.m. in the summertime. But for simplicity, I will reference the 9th hour as 3 p.m. going forward, and the 12th hour as 6 p.m., even though there are many variables and they aren't always the same. Now, I know the WMSCOG leaders are going to scream about the Bible saying 3 p.m. or 9th hour when Jesus passed away. Again, I never said they weren't the same, I just said they aren't always the same. It depends on the time of year. Anyways, this between the evenings, or 3 p.m., is used for both Exodus 12 verse 6 and Leviticus 23:5 when talking about the Passover. Now, I am not saying that the Passover was being eaten at 3 p.m., just that the lambs were slaughtered at 3 p.m. How do we know this? Well, in the regulation, God gave, you are to first slaughter the lamb, which takes time. Then cook the lamb to eat, and then prepare the bitter herbs, and make unleavened bread. Essentially, you're making a feast for your family. If you've ever done that before, it takes hours. Now imagine if you have to butcher the animal as well as prepare it. So depending on how big your family is, determines how long you will take. Now here's the interesting thing. The only regulation God gave was to eat it that night and leave none till morning. That's all. Not everyone started or ended their Passover at the same time. The main point here is that the WMSCOG teaches that the twilight where the lambs were slaughtered in Exodus chapter 12 verse 6 and Leviticus 23 verse 5 means sunset. That is why they eat the bread and wine at around 8 p.m. or sunset. If you look at the Hebrew word twilight, again, it is areb, or between the evenings, aka the ninth hour. Then once the lamb is slaughtered and prepared, God says, eat it that night, leave nothing till morning. He also said to eat the first Passover in haste because they were leaving Egypt very shortly after. But that is the only time he said eat it in haste. The regulation of the Passover is to eat it that night. Don't leave any of it till morning. There is no set time for keeping the actual eating of the meal. God never says you must eat or begin to eat at this time. God simply says eat it that night and don't leave any of it till morning. Now, the WMSCOG insists that the Twilight referenced here in Exodus chapter 12 verse 6 and Leviticus chapter 23 verse 5 is the same time that they keep their bread and wine ceremony, aka the New Covenant Passover. Do you see the discrepancy here? They keep their Passover at around 7:30 p.m., but the Bible says the Passover begins and the lamb is slaughtered at 3 p.m. or between the evenings. Not only that, but God gives no indication of when the lamb is supposed to be eaten. Just that you should eat it that night and leave none of it till morning. This too contradicts the WMSCOG, who teaches that you must eat the Passover at 7:30 p.m. or at sunset, and it must be eaten before midnight. That is not the regulation you see in the Old Testament. So if the WMSCOG is basing the regulations off the Old Testament Passover, we are already off to a shaky start. But let's examine further. We just read that God refers to the Passover itself as a lasting ordinance. Then, what is a lasting ordinance? Well, the Hebrew word here in verse 17 is olam, or everlasting. And in verse 24 it says forever, or ad olam, which has the same meaning. I know right now if there's any WMSCOG leader or current member watching, they're probably going to pause on this and say, look, he said everlasting, case closed. Yeah, not so fast. This is where it gets interesting. Now, this word can mean literally forever, or long duration, or antiquity. In the context of Exodus chapter 12 and Leviticus chapter 23, it is referring to the Mosaic laws. Basically, if you are a Jew, you are to keep the Passover until God's appointed time of ceasing. So the word forever or everlasting here doesn't literally mean forever. Now, I know what you're thinking. Really, how does forever not really mean forever? Isn't that convenient? Let me explain. Let's say you're driving in a car with your friend and he says, this car trip is taking forever. Does this literally mean that you will be driving literally forever? No, of course not. It's an expression. Your drive will end when you get to your destination. It is the same with the Old Covenant. God put the old law into effect and enforced it until the new covenant comes through Jesus' blood on the cross. Even the WMSCOG teaches that the old covenant has ceased and it is null and void, and that the new covenant was commenced through Jesus' death. But let's not get too far ahead of ourselves. Let's consider the WMSCOG stance here. They say this means that the Passover is something to be kept forever for the generations to come, which is their justification for keeping it even now. If you're going to insist that Exodus chapter 12 verse 17 and verse 24, that the Old Covenant Passover is indeed forever, as in forever, then it means you should sacrifice a lamb still to this day. Because according to Exodus chapter 12, the regulation is a lamb, not just bread and wine. Then it means a lamb should be offered forever, or olam, which means the burden of proof is on you. Where in the Bible does it say that the New Covenant Passover bread and wine that the WMSCOG practices is to be kept forever? Then you might say, oh, well, the Passover was just simply changed into bread and wine of the New Covenant instead of the lamb, but it's still the Passover. Okay, fine. Then you have to admit that the regulation and rules regarding the Passover in Exodus and Leviticus are not binding anymore then, correct? Meaning, you will also have to admit that the forever in Exodus chapter 12 doesn't actually literally mean forever. You can't have both. The forever or olam, in regards to the Old Covenant and its regulations, means it has an expiration date which God hints at in Jeremiah chapter 31, verse 31. You can't insist on the forever in regards to the Passover of the Old Covenant in the Torah to justify why we need to keep it now, but then say, oh, it was changed and we do it a different way now to prove your new covenant. It doesn't make any sense. Pick one. Either the Old Covenant lasts forever or only until the New Covenant takes effect. You can't have both. Another point I would like to make is who is this covenant being given to? Israel. Then the generations to come must refer to the Jews that were going to be born later, right? Meaning if you're a Gentile, the rules and regulations would not apply to you if you were living at the time. If you are a Gentile, you are not part of the generations to come. But if you're going to insist that the lasting ordinance in the Old Testament applies to everyone now, and not just the Israelites, then I have some questions for you. Numbers chapter 10 tells us that it is a lasting ordinance to blow the trumpet whenever the community is to move. Numbers chapter 15 tells us that the food offering is a forever statute. Numbers 19 tells us that the regulation regarding the water of cleansing is to be a lasting ordinance both for Jews and foreigners. Numbers chapter 35 tells us that the regulations regarding the city of refuge are to be enforced throughout generations. Leviticus chapter 3 tells us that we can't eat fat and that it's a forever statute. And the list goes on and on. Then this would mean that if lasting ordinance does indeed mean forever, just like the Passover, why does the WMSCOG not insist then that we should keep the above listed verses as we just described? You can't just pick and choose when it comes to putting a yoke on people. You either prescribe the whole law or none of it. So already we see the insistence of the Passover starting to crumble a little bit. Let's briefly recap. First, we saw the twilight when Passover begins, aka the time of slaughter for the lamb, is not sunset that the WMSCOG mistakenly teaches, but it is actually 3 p.m. or the 9th hour. There is no specified time which God gave for us to eat the Passover. Just eat it that night and leave none of it till morning. Lasting ordinance means the old covenant is in effect only until Jesus comes to establish the new covenant. The generations to come refers to the Jews, not to the Gentiles. Now, there are 3 big questions that we might have at this point. Is the Passover important then? What is the new covenant? What is the bread and wine Jesus gave then? Let's answer them one by one. The first question, does the Passover have anything to do with me now? Yes. Why? Well, of course, Jesus is our Passover lamb. But why is he our Passover lamb? Do you remember in the Green Book about the feast where Armstrong talks about Jesus being crucified on unleavened bread? Now, I know you as a WMSCOG leader or member watching this are probably thinking, yeah, that was amazing. How could he know that? Who could know such things? Keep that in mind as we dive into some stuff. For context, we're going to look at the book of John when Jesus was arrested. I know WMSCOG leaders are probably shaking their heads right now knowing what is coming. They love to completely discount John and tell their members, what do the other Gospels say though? What does Father say in his book? I am foreshadowing a little bit here. You'll see what I'm talking about here in a minute. John chapter 18 verse 28. Then the Jewish leaders took Jesus from Caiaphas to the palace of the Roman governor. By now it was early morning, and to avoid ceremonial uncleanness, they did not enter the palace, because they wanted to be able to eat the Passover. So Pilate came out to them and asked, what charges are you bringing against this man? Now, let's see John chapter 18 verses 37 to 38. You are a king then, said Pilate. Jesus answered, you say that I am a king. In fact, the reason I was born and came into this world is to testify to the truth. Everyone on the side of truth listens to me. What is truth? Retorted Pilate. With this he went out again to the Jews gathered there and said, I find no basis for a charge against him. But it is your custom for me to release to you one prisoner at the time of the Passover. Do you want me to release the King of the Jews? Also, let's see John chapter 19, verses 13 to 14. When Pilate heard this, he brought Jesus out and sat down on the judge's seat at a place known as the Stone Pavement, which in Aramaic is Gabbatha. It was the day of preparation of the Passover. It was about noon. Here, we can clearly see that according to John, Jesus was crucified on the Passover. That is why he is our Passover lamb. Do you want more evidence? It might have clicked in your brain already, but do you remember when the lambs were slaughtered on the Passover? Between the evenings, 9th hour, or 3 p.m. Then when did Jesus die on the cross? Matthew chapter 27, verse 46. From noon till about 3 in the afternoon, darkness came over all the land. About 3 in the afternoon, Jesus cried out in a loud voice, Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani, which means, my God, why have you forsaken me? When some of those standing there heard this, they said, he's calling Elijah. Immediately, one of them ran and got a sponge. He filled it with wine vinegar, put it on a staff, and offered it to Jesus to drink. The rest said, now leave him alone. Let's see if Elijah comes to save him. And when Jesus had cried out again in a loud voice, he gave up his spirit. Here the Bible says Jesus died around 3 p.m. or 9th hour, which is between the evenings. Meaning, Jesus was not only crucified on the day of Passover, but died at the same time the lambs were being slaughtered. That is why Jesus is the fulfillment of the Passover lamb. Now, I don't know about you, but that's pretty amazing. Now, I know the WMSCOG leaders are quick to bust out their green books and quote what An Sang-hong wrote, even though they know 3 chapters were completely removed, saying, "Father said Jesus died on unleavened bread, so that's it." If you read the chapter, An Sang-hong conveniently leaves out any reference to John's Gospel, but cites the other Gospels to prove his point. Have you ever thought about why An Sang-hong doesn't make reference to John when An Sang-hong writes about the death of Jesus? Open your green books to chapter 32 in your severely altered and redacted 1000th edition. That was just a joke. Don't sue me. I know there isn't 1,000 editions. Yet. Anyway, the chapter's title is The Passover and the Last Supper. It is going to be a long read, but bear with me. An Sang-hong writes, and I quote, "Some insist that it was not on the Passover that Jesus celebrated the Last Supper, but on the day before the Passover, the 13th day of the first month in the evening. But in the 3 Gospels of Matthew, Mark, and Luke, Jesus clearly said to his disciples, 'Prepare the Passover,' or 'I have eagerly desired to eat this Passover with you.' Who can deny the words spoken by Jesus himself? Some also insist that it was on the Passover that Jesus was hung on the cross, saying that he must be crucified on the day when the Passover lamb was to be sacrificed, because he was the Passover lamb. Such an interpretation shows they know neither the feast related to Jesus' redemption nor the prophecies fulfilled by Jesus, who is the reality of the sacrifices. The atonement offering was to be sacrificed on the 10th day of the 7th month of the sacred year. Since Jesus became the atonement offering too, he should have been sacrificed on the cross even on the Day of Atonement, the 10th day of the 7th month, shouldn't he? Actually, Jesus became all the sacrifices of the feast. He became the regular burnt offering, the lamb offered on the Sabbath day, the Passover lamb, and the atonement offering. For the fulfillment of prophecy, Jesus must be sacrificed on the 15th day of the first month of the sacred year. The Passover was the greatest festival of the Jews, so they didn't hand criminals over to be crucified on the Passover. In apostolic days, when the Apostle Peter was kept in prison, the Passover came and they waited until it was over. But the Feast of Unleavened Bread, the 15th day of the first month of the sacred year, was the day on which the Israelites left Egypt, Numbers chapter 33, verse 3, and the Egyptians buried all their firstborn, Numbers chapter 33, verse 4. So it was customary for the Jews to crucify criminals on this day. Jesus redeemed us from the curse of the law by becoming a curse for us sinners, by being hung on the cross, Galatians 3, verse 13. Christ redeemed us from the curse of the law by becoming a curse for us. For it is written, 'Cursed is everyone who is hung on a tree.' If we carefully study the various verses in the Bible, we come to know that Jesus was crucified on unleavened bread the day after the Passover. Therefore, it was on the 14th day of the first month at twilight, when the Passover lamb had to be sacrificed, that Jesus ate the Last Supper, the Passover." End of quote. Now, a couple of things I'd like to draw attention to. An Sang-hong says that some insist that it was on the Passover that Jesus was hung on the cross. I wonder who the some people are. Maybe like the Apostle John, who was actually there and told us Jesus was crucified on Passover? If you're not sure, read John 18 and 19 again. I find it interesting that An Sang-hong never addresses or mentions John's account of the crucifixion being on Passover. The most likely reason is it would contradict his theology of Jesus being crucified on unleavened bread. But honestly, I understand why An Sang-hong doesn't mention John at all, because if you read Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, you're going to have a heck of a time harmonizing everything. Let me explain. According to Matthew, Mark, and Luke, Jesus and the disciples ate the Passover on the first day of unleavened bread in the evening. Then Jesus was taken away that night. The next day, aka first month 15th day, Jesus was crucified. So it makes sense why at first glance, An Sang-hong says that Jesus was crucified on unleavened bread. But according to the account of John, if you read John chapter 13, Jesus ate the Passover and washed his disciples' feet and gave closing remarks and prayer. Then was captured later that night, crucified the next day, which according to John is the first month 14th day, making Jesus being crucified on the Passover, and he breathed his last at the very same time the Passover sacrifice happened at 9th hour or 3 p.m. This means that the Feast of Unleavened Bread, or first month 15th day, would be the day after Jesus' crucifixion. Now, this apparent contradiction in the Synoptic Gospels and John's Gospel chronology is nothing new. In fact, it has left scholars and theologians scratching their heads for centuries. If An Sang-hong was indeed the second coming of Jesus, why does he not even attempt to harmonize Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John in his writings? If he is indeed the root of David, this would be a perfect time and a perfect opportunity to clear up this apparent contradiction and really prove that he is indeed the very Christ that was crucified 2,000 years ago. But he avoids John like the plague when talking about the crucifixion because it destroys the narrative that Jesus was crucified on unleavened bread. Another point on this, An Sang Hong insists that Jesus was crucified on unleavened bread. Not only that, but it was customary for Jews to crucify criminals on unleavened bread. He also said that the Jews would never crucify criminals on Passover. Then, let's analyze this for a minute. Leviticus chapter 23 verse 5. The Lord's Passover begins at twilight on the 14th day of the first month. On the 15th day of that month, the Lord's festival of unleavened bread begins. For 7 days you must eat bread made without yeast. On the first day, hold a sacred assembly and do no regular work. According to the regulation regarding the feast, the first month 14th day is not identified as a rest day or a Sabbath. However, the first month 15th day, which is regarded as the first Sabbath of the Feast of Unleavened Bread, beginning the 7-day feast, is regarded as a Sabbath rest. Meaning on the first month 14th day, you could work and do normal things. In fact, it was known as the day of preparation. But the following day, the Feast of Unleavened Bread, or first month 15th day, is a Sabbath rest. Then, if An Sang Hong is right about Jesus being crucified on unleavened bread, it would mean that Jesus would have been beaten, flogged, and crucified on a day where God said, "Do no regular work, it is a Sabbath rest." Then, did it happen? Well, let's see. John chapter 19, verse 31. Now, it was the day of preparation, and the next day was to be a special Sabbath, because the Jewish leaders did not want the bodies left on the crosses during the Sabbath. They asked Pilate to have the legs broken and the bodies taken down. Here it says special Sabbath or high day. In this context, a special Sabbath is actually referring to unleavened bread. But that is another subject for another time. The point here is that the Jewish leaders didn't want bodies left up on the cross during the Sabbath. Now, if the Jews didn't even want bodies left on the cross during the Sabbath, do you really think that they would crucify criminals on a Sabbath? If An Sang Hong is correct about Jesus being crucified on unleavened bread, that day is considered to be a Sabbath, and it is forbidden to work that day. This means the Jews would be breaking the feast regulation in order to crucify Jesus. I have found no biblical or historical evidence that the Jews had a custom of desecrating the feast regulation to crucify criminals. An Sang Hong clearly said that if you study the verses that he mentions, you will find that Jesus was crucified on unleavened bread. The only verses he lists is Numbers chapter 33 verses 3 to 4. That simply state the Jews left Egypt and that the Egyptians buried their dead on unleavened bread. How is that proof of Jesus being crucified on unleavened bread? Or how is that proof that the Jews crucified criminals on that day? Also, he fails to list any verses saying or hinting at Jesus being crucified on unleavened bread. So make of that what you will, I guess. He also states that it was custom for the Jews to crucify criminals on that day, without a single shred of historical or biblical evidence to prove his case. Then I would like to ask you, the viewer, who are you going to believe? The eyewitness account of John or An Sang Hong? You can't have both. If you discount John's testimony about Jesus being crucified on Passover, then you must discount John's testimony of everything else, which means you can't insist on John chapter 6 verse 53 to 54, where the WMSCOG teaches Jesus' flesh and blood are essential for eternal life. You can't insist then on John chapter 13, where the WMSCOG says we need to wash our feet before eating the Passover, because these teachings are not found in the other Gospels. So if you're going to discount John or ignore John, then these teachings go out with him. You can't pick and choose, you can't add or take away. Now, I know what you're thinking. Does the Bible contradict itself then? Or do the feasts contradict themselves? I wouldn't say that. I would rather say our understanding of the Bible or the feasts contradict the Bible. The hardest part about this whole debacle is that the chronology of all the Gospels is correct if you look at the events that took place regarding Jesus alone, without adding the time frame or holy days. Let me explain. I'm just going to say the order of events without listing the verses. When you have time, I would read Matthew chapter 26 to 28, Luke chapter 22 to 24, Mark chapter 14 to 16, and John chapter 13 to 19 for the full context. All the four Gospels agree on the following exact order of events. Number 1, Jesus had a meal in the evening with his disciples. Number 2, Jesus was betrayed by Judas. Number 3, Peter's denial. Number 4, Jesus was taken before the Jewish leaders. Number 5, Jesus was taken before Pilate. Number 6, Jesus was crucified at 9 a.m. Number 7, Jesus died at 3 p.m. Number 8, Jesus' body placed in the tomb before a Sabbath comes. All the Gospels, including John, are in accordance with this order of events without deviating in the slightest. Then, how is it possible? How can all the Gospels agree to the order of events, but say that the order of events are taking place on different days? This is the frustrating part. So, where's the problem then? The problem arises when you start putting the holy days of when things happened. For instance, let's say the starting point of the events is the meal Jesus ate with his disciples. Then, let's examine all the Gospels, and what do we see? Matthew, Mark, and Luke place the starting point of events on the first month, 14th day. Jesus ate the Passover meal with his disciples in the evening. Judas betrays Jesus. He is taken away later that night. Jesus is before Pilate the next morning, which places Jesus' crucifixion on the first month, 15th day. Then he dies that same afternoon at 3 p.m. or the 9th hour. The body is placed in the tomb before sunset, before the Sabbath or high day comes. Now, John's Gospel places the starting point on the first month, 13th day. Jesus eats a meal with his disciples. John doesn't call it the Passover meal, just the evening meal. First month, 13th day. Judas betrays Jesus. Jesus is taken away later that same night. Jesus is before Pilate the next morning, which places Jesus' crucifixion on the first month, 14th day. Jesus dies that same afternoon at 3 p.m. or 9th hour, between the evenings, just like the Paschal Lamb. The body is placed in the tomb before sunset, before the Sabbath or high day, which in this case it is the first month, 15th day, or the first day of unleavened bread. Now, this is a big deal. It appears that the events themselves are perfectly in order. However, when comparing the days these events happened, it is off by a day. Then, which one is accurate? This is the question for the ages. We can't discount any of the Gospels. If we do, we either have to remove John, or we have to remove Matthew, Mark, and Luke. Now that we know the basic outline of the problems, let's examine some important problems within each of the Synoptic Gospels and John's Gospel. Then let's see if we can sync them together harmoniously. The problem with Matthew, Mark, and Luke is that the evening meal being eaten seems to indicate the Passover lamb, which is on the first month, 14th day, which means that the Passover lamb was already slaughtered earlier that day. This means Jesus would not have fulfilled the Passover lamb sacrifice, since he was crucified almost a full 24 hours later from the time the lambs were sacrificed. The second problem we run into is that Jesus would have been crucified the next day on the first month, 15th day, which, as we have seen, is a Sabbath. The Jews would not have done such a thing on the Sabbath, and there is no proof that they ever have. This means since the Jews would not have worked or had criminals crucified on the first month, 15th day, or the first day of unleavened bread, it begs the question, what day was Jesus crucified then? Obviously it happened, but it wouldn't have happened on the first month, 15th day. But the Gospel of Matthew, Mark, and Luke do not explicitly mention what day it is when Jesus was crucified. It is only implied based on circumstantial evidence. Then the problem with John's Gospel is that if the evening meal in John chapter 13 referenced is the Passover meal or first month 14th day like the other Gospels indicate, and even reference the same meal taking place in all of the Gospels, how do we reconcile John's implications in chapters 18 and 19 that the Passover had not yet happened? Also, the day after Jesus' crucifixion would be first month 15th day, which is a Sabbath rest, which not only John references this Sabbath being the day after the crucifixion, but the other Gospels too reference the day after Jesus' crucifixion being a Sabbath or high day as well. How can we make sense of this and harmonize the Gospels? Join me for part 2 to see how we can accomplish this. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe. That's it for this one, and we'll see you on part 2.